Jacob Miller was a struggling single dad trying to hold his world together with nothing but sheer will and the love he had for his 7-year-old son, Ethan. Life had been cruel since his wife passed away 3 years ago in a tragic car accident, leaving him to navigate parenthood alone while battling crushing debt and relentless hardships. He worked 2 jobs, one as a mechanic in a rundown garage by day and another as a night janitor at a grocery store. Every morning before sunrise, Jacob would prepare Ethan's lunch, tie his worn-out sneakers, and walk him to school with a smile. Even though his heart was heavy with worries he dared not share. The town where they lived was small, the kind where everyone knew everyone, yet Jacob felt invisible, like a ghost drifting through the routines of survival, unnoticed and unappreciated. But fate, it seemed, had plans that would soon change his life forever. One autumn afternoon, as Jacob finished a long shift at the garage, he decided to take a shortcut through the wooded trail behind the town's outskirts. The sky was painted with fiery streaks of orange and gold, and the air smelled of pine and smoke, but it was that smoke that soon filled his lungs with panic. As he neared a clearing, he spotted the source, a small cabin engulfed in flames, the fire crackling and roaring with merciless fury. Without a second thought, Jacob sprinted toward the inferno, his instincts overriding reason. He could faintly hear cries for help, desperate and weak, coming from within the collapsing structure. Adrenaline surged through him as he grabbed a fallen branch to break down the door. The heat was unbearable, singeing his skin and blurring his vision with sweat and smoke. Inside, amid the chaos, he saw a figure, a woman in charred firefighter gear, pinned beneath a fallen beam. How she ended up there was a mystery he had no time to ponder. With strength he didn't know he possessed, Jacob heaved the beam aside and lifted the woman into his arms. She was unconscious, her face covered in soot, her breathing shallow. Stumbling out of the burning wreckage, just as the roof gave way, Jacob collapsed onto the grass, gasping for air as he shielded her from the falling embers. Sirens wailed in the distance as fire trucks and ambulances approached. But in that moment, all Jacob could think about was whether the stranger in his arms would survive. The paramedics took over, rushing the woman to the hospital while firefighters extinguished what was left of the cabin. Jacob, though exhausted and coughing from smoke inhalation, refused treatment until he was certain she was safe. Days passed, and Jacob visited the hospital as often as his schedule allowed, though he never expected gratitude or recognition. But when the woman finally awoke and asked to see him, everything began to change. Her name was Emily Carter, and as she sat across from Jacob in the sterile hospital room, she revealed something that left him stunned. She wasn't just a firefighter. She was the daughter of the town's wealthiest and most influential man, a man Jacob had once worked for and who had dismissed him in his darkest hour. Emily spoke softly but with determination, thanking Jacob for saving her life and telling him that she had been undercover, investigating illegal activities linked to arson for a special state task force. She had always kept her true identity, hidden to protect herself and her mission. And now, because of Jacob's bravery, she was alive and ready to repay him in ways he could never imagine. The bond between them deepened as Emily learned about Jacob's struggles, his devotion to Ethan, and the quiet sacrifices he made daily. But just as hope began to flicker in Jacob's weary heart, powerful enemies who had tried to silence Emily discovered Jacob's involvement, putting him and Ethan in grave danger. And so began a journey that would test their courage, their loyalty, and their will to fight for a better future. Viewers, if you've been moved by Jacob's selflessness and strength, don't. The quiet town that had once turned its back on Jacob Miller now buzzed with whispers about the man who had risked everything to save Emily Carter. But while some praised his heroism, others watched from the shadows, their intentions far from kind. Jacob didn't care for fame or recognition. His only concern was keeping Ethan safe and figuring out what Emily's revelation truly meant for their future. Emily was still recovering, but she insisted on visiting Jacob at the small house he rented on the edge of town. The place was humble, its paint peeling and its fence broken in places. But she could see it was filled with love, especially in the way Jacob interacted with his son. Over steaming cups of coffee at Jacob's worn kitchen table, Emily laid out the truth. The arson at the cabin had been meant for her. The criminal ring she was investigating had grown bolder, setting fires to cover their tracks, laundering money through construction deals, and bribing town officials. Jacob's act of saving her had unknowingly placed him and Ethan in the crosshairs of a dangerous network that would stop at nothing to silence threats. The weight of it all bore down on Jacob like a mountain, but he didn't flinch. If protecting his boy meant standing up against these criminals, then so be it. Together, Jacob and Emily formed an unlikely team. By day, Jacob went to work and cared for Ethan, pretending all was normal. By night, he and Emily gathered evidence, tracked suspicious movements, and shared information with the task force Emily had worked for. But danger lurked closer than they knew. One night, returning home after a long shift, Jacob found his front door ajar. His heart raced as he called for Ethan, relief flooding him when he found his son safe, though shaken, hiding in a closet. Someone had broken in. leaving behind a chilling message, a scorched piece of wood with the word "stop" carved into it. That was the final straw. Jacob knew he couldn't face this threat alone. Swallowing his pride, he reached out to the community, to the very neighbors who had once ignored his struggles. And to his surprise, they rallied around him. People donated security cameras, offered to help watch over Ethan, and spread the word about the danger that had crept into their town. The spirit of unity began to awaken in a place long divided by wealth and status. Emily, determined to end the nightmare, decided it was time to reveal her true identity publicly. At a town meeting, she stood beside Jacob and told the full story about the arson, the criminal ring, and how Jacob had saved her life. The townsfolk listened, shocked and ashamed that they had let such corruption fester under their noses. But not everyone was pleased. The leaders of the criminal operation, once hidden behind masks of respectability, now felt threatened and lashed out. One night, under cover of darkness, they set Jacob's garage workplace ablaze, hoping to send a final warning. Jacob watched, helplessly, as the business that kept food on his table burned to the ground. But what they didn't understand was that each act of cruelty only fueled Jacob's resolve. With Emily's help, Jacob uncovered damning evidence, secret ledgers, fake contracts, and recordings of meetings that exposed the network's reach. Emily used her connections to bring in state authorities. And in a coordinated operation, the criminals were arrested in a dramatic series of raids that rocked the town to its core. Among those taken into custody were men Jacob had once worked for, men who had dismissed him as worthless. Now, they stood in handcuffs, their empires crumbling. The aftermath was bittersweet. The town, though shaken, began to heal. Jacob was offered a new job, managing a community repair shop funded by donations, where he could train others and rebuild his life with dignity. Emily stayed in town, drawn not just by the mission that had brought her there, but by the bond she had formed with Jacob and Ethan. What began as gratitude blossomed into something deeper, something neither of them had dared hope for. In time, Jacob's small house became a home filled with laughter and light, and the man who had once walked invisible through the streets was now a symbol of courage and hope. The town learned that true heroes aren't always the ones with badges or titles. Sometimes, they're the single dads who work tirelessly for their children, the ones who stand up when no one else will. And viewers, if Jacob's journey has inspired you, don't forget to